I'm so happy to be alive at a time when, mental health conversations are, just being had, whether mental illness and mental health, all of that. When I think about society, what society has done in terms of putting people in a box of how they're supposed to be, say the men are meant to be strong. They're not meant to, show their weaknesses or their feelings. Women are meant to make themselves smaller. Women can't say they don't want to have children. Like there's just so much going on. When you think about for the work that you do, when you think about it, how has this affected, people's mental health in general? The impact of these boxes that we've been put into.
Well, I would say that generally the brain is such a beautiful organ, but it's also a very fragile organ that works less on reality but more of perception. And so while you were describing the boxes that people have been placed by culture and socialization, over time, over the years, what that has done is that it has created false perception and sometimes the feeling of helplessness for so many people. And so yes, I know what I'm feeling, but I'm told that I'm not supposed to express it. And so there's a struggle, because what that also means is that I don't even understand what I'm going through or what I'm feeling. And that, for some people, then leads to a faulty perception because you're interpreting it wrongly. So men would interpret an emotion like, say you feel sad, as a sign of weakness. Women would interpret anxiety to mean that they are not good enough. And so when you have this over time, if not managed, this has been some of the factors actually that have led to increased mental health concerns. In this age, we also find that there are more of these restrictions, right? Even though, yes, we are creating more awareness, but there are more restrictions because of the economic challenges that people face and having to fit all these things together. And so, but the good thing is, yes, we're getting to know more about it, and people are getting to understand that they can seek help when they need it.
What would you say, is the most common form of mental illness that you have seen in recent times? I hear people talk about anxiety a lot. Mm-hmm. It's almost as if it's a term that is being used loosely. Some people talk of PTSD and triggers and all of these things. Yeah. What do you find is the most common type of mental illness that people are experiencing?
So I would say anxiety and depression are the most common. In fact, most times or many times, both of them are comorbid. That means that you're likely to see a person with depression also having anxiety, or the person with anxiety also having depression. We have something that a lot of us clinicians are beginning to see now, which is the post-pandemic anxiety. Many people are beginning to experience more anxiety as a result of the after effect of the pandemic. Even when it comes to, say, roles, expectations in marriage, for example, you need to understand that you cannot give what you don't have. And so as a woman, you need to put yourself first in that sense, not because you're selfish, but because you understand that is how you can draw the mental strength to be able to give to your kids or give to your husband or give to all the other people who expect. So be able to put yourself first and seek resources, massage, shopping if you have to, pedicure, manicure, and then just therapy. Exactly. Yoga. So or even reading. Going online or getting books that you can read to develop yourself. I think these are things that I'll recommend actually for women, but validate your emotions and give yourself time.
To wrap up the conversation, I want you to please share 3 tips with me on how to, for 2 different scenarios, how to recognize that you have a mental illness or you might be suffering from something. The other tip will be, how can you as a friend or someone on the other side recognize that somebody is going through something, and how can you help them? What ways can you help them to get through it?
I always say that there is the litmus test, which is the before and after test. You want to, and of course this is made possible if you're even aware of yourself, self-awareness. If you're not aware, you're likely going to miss the before and after. But the key is, if you're aware, then you want to track, how have I been before now? What was my emotions, my mood? What would that have been before now? And so looking at that would help you track if there's something wrong. I think a more practical way of doing this is to journal. And then you journal what we call the mood monitor, where you wake up every morning and ask yourself, how do I feel today? What are my thoughts like today? What are the things happening in my life? You know, you're able to write that down. Now, what that would help you do is that over time, you'll be able to track a pattern, right? You'll be able to track, oh, you know what, I've been consistently sad this week, or I've been consistently sad for the last 2 weeks, or maybe not even sad, anxious, or maybe irritable. And then that tells you that something might be wrong. Of course, the fact that, you know, there's a change doesn't necessarily mean it's a mental illness. Okay. Because before we start to self-diagnose or diagnose other people, we want to look at how much distress it's causing to us. Right. You know, how much distress is this causing to you? You also want to look at how much your behavior, your response deviates from what is expected from the norm. And then you want to look at the duration, how long, right? Because for every mental illness, there is a duration attached to it. So the fact that a person is sad for 2 or 3 days doesn't mean they are depressed. Of course, I know a lot of people say, oh, I'm depressed, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're depressed. Okay. Because say, for example, for major depression, you probably need 2 weeks to give a diagnosis of that. So you need to be constantly sad, feeling hopeless, worthless, changes in your sleep, irregular pattern in your appetite. But significantly for major depression is the thoughts of suicide. So you're also thinking about ending your life, which is different from the clinical depression, which doesn't come with suicidal thoughts and lasts over a period of 6 months. So before you say a person is depressed, you want to look at 6 months. That's without suicidal thoughts. If there are suicidal thoughts, 2 weeks. And then for chronic depression, you're looking at 2 years, right? Ooh. So there has to be a duration. Right. All mental illnesses have a duration attached to it. So 2 days, 3 days doesn't mean you have a mental illness. You probably, yes, are struggling with an emotion, or there's a situation around that you need to deal with. And so you need to recognize that so that you do something about it. Okay.
What would you say that we can do to maintain that level of productivity and manage these things that we go through, especially with anxiety?
So when it comes to anxiety as an emotion, not as a disorder, I always say to people that anxiety, just like every other emotion, is meant for survival. Yeah. And so what does anxiety help us do? I think recognizing that would help us use it well. Okay. It's that anxiety prepares you for threats and prepares you for risk, right? So if a person says, oh, I'm having work anxiety, it's because they perceive a certain level of threat or risk relating to their work. Okay. And so recognizing this is the first place to start. Now, many people misinterpret these things because, again, when we feel anxious, our body, our brain instructs the secretion of certain chemicals that don't feel good. But these chemicals are not intended to hurt you. Okay. They're actually intended to help improve your body metabolism to respond to the threat. So you probably would have increased heart palpitation. You probably would have, you start to think a lot, worry a lot, In some cases, some people find it difficult breathing. And when they look at the signs, they think there's something wrong with me. Yeah. I'm losing my mind. Yeah. But it's because the body is generating, permit me to use the word, a sort of energy, power for you to use. Now, if you don't use this, or if you don't even know, you're likely to misinterpret it, because when this happens, the body also shuts down some regions. So it's like saying appetite, for example. If the roof were to be on fire, you don't need to be eating fried rice. And so what the body does is that it extracts the blood from those regions that it feels you don't need this right now, and supplies the regions that you really need at that time. Which is run. Exactly, which is run, which is think, which is. So the typical response to anxiety should be problem solving, right? It should be. You should asking yourself, okay, you know what, is there really a risk? Because the brain doesn't differentiate. It says potential risk. It doesn't necessarily have to be a risk. It's just your perception that, oh, this is a risk. The body responds. So when you look at it, oh, is this really a risk? Yes or no? If it's no, you're likely going to feel better. If it's yes, it's a risk, that is not a time to freak out. That is a time to say to yourself, okay, great, if this is a risk, what can I do to mitigate the risk? Now, the problem that many people face is that they expect to eradicate the risk. But risk cannot be eradicated. Everything we do in life is risky, right? So the best you can do is to mitigate it. Okay. And so you need to be comfortable with that. That you know what, I can't take away this. I can only mitigate it. And so once you do that, once you come up with that, you'll find out that you start to feel better because you've used the emotion the way it should be used. But in the meantime, for many people, because of the
Especially with
distress
nerves, yeah.
that they feel, so I would always advise, get somewhere, sit down, do a breathing exercise, breathe in through your nose and let it out through your mouth, right? That helps to regulate the oxygen supply. And of course, you start to feel calmer. You could also ground yourself in the environment. Look around. What can you see? So you can name 5 things you can see, right? So that distracts you from the emotions. Now, even though it's the brain that initiated this response, the typical programming is there is a threat, there is a risk, secrete these chemicals, right? The brain doesn't know that, oh, when you start to feel distressed, I was the one that secreted the chemicals that make you feel distressed. Once the brain gets the message that, oh, you still feel distressed, it goes and secretes the same chemicals again. So over time, those chemicals become harmful, and that starts to hurt you. So it then takes your own intervention to step in and say, oh, I understand you're looking out for me, but at this point, it's okay, I'll handle it.
I can handle it.
And so I think that would help people deal with anxiety better, whether it's workplace anxiety or social anxiety. It's you asking yourself, what is the risk? Is there really a risk? If there's a risk, so what can I do to mitigate it? So if I have a problem with interacting with people, then I'm asking myself, what can I do? What's the plan? Do I say hi, or do I just say, oh, your shirt looks good? So there is a common ground that helps you feel relaxed and better, and then you're able to relate with the situation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chris. I mean, from all you've said, it's very obvious that, there's no health without mental health.
Yes.